everyone, it's Judy Warner. Welcome back to this week's Ecosystem Podcast. Today I'm joined with Sean Patterson, the COO of Summit Interconnect Technologies. Summit is the largest privately held PCB manufacturer in North America. We talk about things that you need to know that manufacturers wish you knew to make your boards go more smoothly through manufacturing and hopefully save you a lot of time and money. I want to give you a little background on Sean because he has such an interesting background, and I think it'll give you good context for our conversation. Sean was a U.S. Naval submarine officer, and he got his system engineering degree from the U.S. Naval Academy. Then he went on to get his master's from MIT in nuclear science and engineering. Then he went to work as an executive at TTM, where he oversaw manufacturing operations of their aerospace and defense facilities. Then he did something unexpected, which was leave the industry and go to work for Amazon, where he took on a huge team, started out a pilot program, built a big team to help Amazon with their middle mile. And through this process, he learned so much that he hopes to bring back to the PCB industry. Additionally, he worked as an executive of startup, and all these things give Sean a very interesting perspective that I think will really inform and interest you in our conversation. Without further ado, let's jump right into our conversation with Sean Patterson of Summit. Hi, Sean. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you about my favorite subject, PCBs.
Great. Thanks for inviting me today, Judy.
Well, I want to just dive right in and talk about, from your perspective, someone who's been on every side of this industry, what do you wish engineers and PCB layout professionals knew about PCBs?
Yeah. So, you talked about my background a little bit at the beginning of this filming, and I think, I've had a pretty broad view of different industries. I have some different engineering degrees, I think, than typical PCB individuals, from control system engineering at the Academy and nuclear engineering at MIT. And what that's given me is kind of a broader view of multiple engineering disciplines. Plus, I've been in multiple different industries, between the Navy and Amazon, some startup companies, 3D printing, healthcare, these kind of things. And having been at those companies as well as customers and suppliers of those companies, what I've really found is the PCBs they're a pretty complex manufacturing process that's not appreciated very much. I actually find I'd say the most complex raw manufacturing process that I've ever seen. And I want to sort of separate that between assembly and PCB fabrication. And
Right.
a lot of what people see are, the components on boards, a fully populated board. And, that final state is assembly. And that's where a lot of contract manufacturers in the EMS space kind of understand. And a lot of people don't understand the PCB fabrication, which is the bare board, no components on. Even though Summit does offer some quick turn services in assembly that kind of ties off in removing some time issues to get customers products faster. The core of what we do is PCB fabrication only. And that background I just discussed has really convinced me that, we're taking some raw materials of copper, foil, laminate, some pre-preg in the middle. And we're taking those raw materials, and I think it was like a ball of clay, and we're massaging that ball of clay over and over and over again through multiple steps. Yes, there are some PCBs you can make in a day, but on average, we start to get to 30, 60, even 6 months sometimes of the same circuit board that we're working on for 7 days a week and 24/7. And it takes that long to process it because what these boards do see is multiple engineering disciplines in the entire process. There's electrical engineering, there's mechanical engineering, there's chemical engineering, industrial engineering, and a whole host of other ones like optical engineering, etc. And when you add it all up, it all goes in this same ball of clay. And so PCB manufacturing is really manufacturing an end component that is an electromechanical functioning thing. Mm-hmm. That is the only, in most bombs, an electronic bomb stack, is the only built component in that entire supply chain. Every single circuit board is different for whatever end product it goes in. Semiconductors, there's a lot of the same. It's a one-to-many relationship of
Right.
the number of i7, processors that go inside of multiple motherboards. Even different revisions of those motherboards. They all have different design, and the only unique part is that PCB. And it goes inside a very complex manufacturing process. And so what I wish the engineers would appreciate or start to understand is how that process works, because fundamentally your cost, which comes down to material selection for performance that we can help with, that cost, the amount of time it takes to build something, and the yield, and most of that is driven by design.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as a fabricator, you're often not brought into the design cycle at an appropriate time in order to make a board successfully produced.
Right.
Most fabricators, including Summit, and I use this word like this sort of statement, anybody can yield anything once. You know, there are plenty of board shops that can build something, and we can do it. If you're just in dire straits, say I really need you to do with the design I have, and we'll go and build it, and it may have a 10% yield. And unless you're
Yeah.
having that active conversation with your supplier, especially if you're going to use suppliers for a prototype and then shift it over when you go to production, it's very important to understand how your design affected the yield, the costs, and everything, before you wind up in a situation where you did a prototype from a company that says we can do anything, and then you move it over to production and say, yeah, we're going to start yielding it, but you're starting at 30-40% yields, and your timeline and your deliveries you need do not match up to a yield like that. And so it's very important for engineers to appreciate the complexity of the manufacturing process and how their design affects that, and work with manufacturers like Summit that have a prototyping to volume option in the United States, because then we can transfer the knowledge and take you on
Right.
that journey from prototyping to production while we're working on yields. Now, what is certainly preferable at the end of the day is to utilize our field application engineering team or our DFM, design for manufacturing services, while you are doing the design, so that day one of the entire process, you just cut out tons of back and forth and know that your design is up to standards from a reliability point of view, and as well as the quality of, the throughput and internal quality that drives through the throughput and yields, and therefore cost and delivery times. So,
And I
so
think,
I wish they
go
would know
ahead.
when to bring us into that process, right?
Yes. And I think I feel so much the same, and I've lived it, right? Because of being in sales and marketing, but working with engineers for decades, specifically around the PCB. And when we basically let our PCB supply chain go to China, it's like I've lived that whole journey, and we lost so much appreciation. My friend Anne Marie calls them little green squares, right? And if we see them as a line item on a BOM, and I'm an engineer and I miss that, or I just design something for efficacy or timing, and then I throw it to my buyer or to my CM, and I haven't had that conversation, so much gets lost in there, and so much pain happens in
Right.
that spot. And I also have a friend, Eli Hughes. I did a podcast with him a couple of weeks ago, and he talks about full stack hardware engineering. And what he says is, be aware of your upstream and downstream stakeholders. And I would say the bare PCB is one for engineers that at least I see, and you're sort of confirming for me here, is that's a piece that's gotten lost. And specifically is now where more EEs have come out of university with, it's not the tribal knowledge that the older people in our generation have gained over decades.
Right.
So there's that gap, and I think this is the perfect way to self-educate and fill that gap. Yeah, at least that's what I'm saying. And you brought up a point to me once, and I also share this. Is it's actually interesting for an engineering brain like
Yeah.
It's a fun field trip.
That I totally agree. We talk about the reasons to want to engage your manufacturer upfront. And upfront can be both in the design cycle and helping on a specific design, but can
Yeah.
also just be broad-based knowledge of, lunch and learns. We'll come teach. We'll do webinars. All these kind of things for your company in order to educate.
Mm-hmm.
But from like an engineer's point of view, that's a reason to go and see is to help your designs. But just from a pure geek perspective, which most engineers are, like it's a really
Yeah,
cool process to see. And
it
and I
is.
think just by seeing it and being excited about seeing how things are made, like to show how it's made, right? Like
Yeah.
a PCB, like to actually go through the actual
Mm-hmm.
technical real process for what are
Yeah.
probably more engineered components today as a
Yeah.
PCB is versus sort of a commoditized mindset that people have. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you order a PCB with your blueprints and your Gerber files, we don't go to a shelf and like pull it off and say, here you go. It's no, we have to, you
I
go and
mean,
back, we do pre-production engineering, go through an entire cycle and build it from scratch when you order it. There is no shelf, right?
which sometime I know your VP of engineering, Jerry Partita, and I've done a lot together, and I appreciate him so much. And for people who are in the PCB fabrication industry, we can start to sound whiny about it, and that's not the point. The point is we want to help engineers so much. If you spend a day, you know, committing to some self education, and I think you told me that you do virtual and in person, which Summit is just one of my favorites. I have a lot of history with the company, but most board shops will do this. All board shops don't have the scope of resources to do it really well, which
Right.
is why I appreciated you guys so much, and why I
Sure.
wanted to have you on, because I really
Yeah.
think you could speak to this point.
Right. I mean, we cover again from prototyping to full volume, but we also cover pretty much every type of board out there,
Yes,
right? RF, rigid flex,
including RF and rigid flex, which are not easy.
right,
And
and assembly prototyping services on top of that. So we can take you to
yeah,
that next level,
yeah,
and we have resources to take volume as well on the assembly side that would be probably more outsourced, but those things combined are really what's important to that engineer, and it sort of help us make you successful, and therefore it makes the relationship successful, because once you get
yeah,
out of this prototyping phase, right, it often gets transferred to a buyer,
yeah,
and the buyer is, especially with the way PCBs are treated in most companies, goes into a commoditized buying market, and so now you're trying these timelines are assumed that they work perfectly, but they're not informed by yield and what an engineer had done originally, and now you're saying, okay, well, we got it and it works, yay. And you put it over to the buyer side. Now, if there's problems, your fabricator is going to say, well, we need help, to change the design in order to make this more producible and hit your timelines
right,
and your cost
right,
targets more. Well, now as an engineer, where you thought you got rid of this thing off your plate, you're coming back to the party, with
right,
a lot more people involved, because now you have larger timelines involved with your end product, and so there's some self protection that can happen as
right.
well. And again, we can do this all up front, and the knowledge is transferable. Like if we're working on with one thing, with one product line and helping you there, well, that
Hmm.
knowledge generally is applicable to everything else,
Right.
right?
And I
And it,
think that's the message,
yeah,
besides,
it's not a means to the end, right?
yes,
It's
it,
gained knowledge that has been, to your point, lost over time. A lot of
mhm,
OEMs used to make their own circuit boards. Some of that knowledge is gone, and the PCB market in the U.S. was crushed during the dot-com bust.
yeah,
But now it's coming back. There are capacity constraints in the United States that are significant. And so if you really want to be even more successful now, you have to get that producibility up, because fabricators may take somebody else's because it's just going to be an easier road to yield, and you're going to lose. It's going to cost you more at the end of the day. And that's because the U.S. is getting capacity strained, because there's more complex designs that are, again, more engineered components that are causing multiple board within board lamination cycles. That's inherently eroded capacity of the United States. While at the same time, things that used to be mechanical are becoming electrical, right? I mean,
yeah,
the light bulb has a circuit board in it now. You have cars, EVs, right? They used to just be
yeah,
mechanical stuff, but it's the same output
yeah,
or more,
hmm,
if you will, of cars. But now it's all coming into an industry that doesn't have as much capacity as it used to in the United States. You have a cheap cost to launch in the satellite world now, and most of those designs are still built in the United States for satellites. So there's a huge satellite demand, which comes with even more complexity on top of it and reliability. They're all going to the same fabricators. And certainly geopolitical pressures on the military side with replacement because of things like Ukraine and whatnot. And there's
Yeah.
a huge demand. And so you want to be a partner with your supplier that you know you're going to be successful together because there's just less options today.
Yeah. So it's interesting to, so let's sort of pivot to that part of the conversation. So, as I said, most US board suppliers would gladly open their doors. So, Summit is not the only one. However, I've been watching you guys for a while and watching what you're doing and how you're doing it, and sort of the strategy that's going on. And specifically, when you and I met, I was excited to hear some of the things that were on your mind as
Mm-hmm.
someone who left the industry and came back, which is part of my journey too. And that is, these reshoring efforts and not just being about the bottom line, right? So, how do you make board manufacturing more modern? How do you take some of those things you learn from all those different disciplines and bring them to bear at Summit?
Right.
Things like Industry 4.0,
Yeah.
all of that. I'd like to hear you unpack that a bit more.
Sure. So we'll talk about sort of like Summit's vision for modernizing the PCB industry. You're right. I did exit the industry for a while. I'm also not, as most people in the industry, I'm not really a grow from within industry person because I did enter after the military. I was probably about 30 years old, I think, at the time when I worked for TTM. And you have an industry that sort of got, for lack of a better word, sort of beat down the commoditization part. And so they
Right.
really started running on shoestring budgets for a while.
Yeah.
And the industry was very successful and a lot of people stayed within it. And what we didn't do though is get outside the industry influence to bring things like Industry 4.0 to the table. And can't if you're not a non-cash to cash business, if you're a cash to cash business, you can't really afford to do that stuff or invest in it. Like, what's really my ROI out of this
Right.
besides, if I'm not
Right.
working in it and putting these things in place, then, where are we going to be 20, 30 years from now?
Right.
And so you have to invest in that. So Summit is coming back, and I came back for a few reasons. One is to try to make a PCB company, or I'll say we will make a PCB company that is customer centric.
Yay.
We need to do that because it's in my blood from Amazon now. But it's the right thing to do because that is your relationship with the customer, so that we don't have to have podcasts where I'm begging engineers to involve us at front because you have those relationships that are formed because you're coming to us and saying this is what our expectations are and we're delivering what you expect. Because at the end of the day, the only people, tell the team, the only people paying the bills are the customer. I don't care what you say. The only people that really, that pay anything is your customer. And so you need to treat them as they should, right? I mean, the restaurant industry always has that whole, the customer's always right. It's true, right? I mean, it's
It
a true
is.
concept because that's all you have. And so you have to treat your customer correct, which means doing what you say you're going to do. Now, some of the challenges with the industry is this sort of, 4.0 kind of escaped it a little bit. There's not like machine to machine connectivity like there are in many industries. And so Summit is investing in the engineering disciplines around that to make it happen for Summit because there is nothing you can just grab off the shelf in the industry and just go and apply it. It doesn't exist. And so we are investing in new engineering disciplines that are supplemental to the factories like AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, more on the machine learning side, with regional process engineering, where we're taking best learned practices between all sites and ensuring that we're doing it the same, so we get a consistent customer experience. And we're not going to have a lesson learned in one site for some product
Yeah.
line you have, and then a year later we learn it again in another facility. That's embarrassing, and it's also a waste of my own resources. So ensuring we break down those barriers, because most PCB companies that have more than one site, we'll call it a roll up for lack of better words, or a conglomerate, they wind up being loosely affiliated competitors at the end of the day. And Summit is not going to do that. We can't do that. That's not the purpose of it. What's the value that Summit as a platform is bringing to our sites, and what value is that site bringing to its customers? And so we need to provide the sites with more tools in order to satisfy customer demand. The complexity of PCBs has increased such that you do need 4.0 kind of mechanisms, because you can't just keep
Yeah,
doing the
you
same
do.
continuous improvement over and over again. You need more data, but those data streams do not exist.
They do
And
not.
so we're applying them. The scheduling of PCBs has gotten extremely difficult, particularly in the last 3 years with this capacity erosion I'm talking
Hmm.
about. And so we're investing in that space from an SNOP kind of approach, with hardware, software systems that are not inside of our industry, because we do not have a solution that we can just go to. And PCBs are a little unique, and so there's some development work that we're doing with software development engineers that are Summit owned, and we're trying to do this so that we can ensure that the commitments that we make to our customer, we deliver for. And so we want to be in a state, say 3 years from now, that says, hey, customer, it's going to be 45 days for you to get that circuit board. Before, we would have told you 30, 20, whatever, because we tried to add it up in the absence of any other product line inside the facility, which is sort of how things have been done historically by most suppliers. We're going to tell you 45, and it's going to be 45. Not we're going to tell you what you want to hear, and then we're going
Yeah.
to deliver it how we could. And we want to get to that place where there's an honest assessment on both the quality, capacity, and pricing, because the customer's all you got at the end of the day.
It's so
And so
true.
that's what
And
we're
I'm
trying to
telling,
bring, so that
yeah,
all those
I love,
engineering kind of things coming together to deliver for the customer in a customer obsessed way, while at the same time providing PCB prototyping through volume and assembly as well.
and it occurs to me that if you do it, others may follow. One, it'll be better for engineers overall. It'll probably help reduce costs to them. But if you start applying these things and actually doing it, Sean, I imagine it's one of those scenarios in rising tide raises all boats. It sounds like it's good for Summit, it's good for engineers, and it's good for the industry. And one thing I'm specifically thinking about is I interviewed David Schild at PCBAA a couple
Yeah.
months ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know much about PCBAA, but they're advocating in DC to get some of either the CHIPS Act money or set aside money. So our little industry does have some augmented resources to invest and to modernize. And what I noticed is Summit has been instrumental to PCBAA, and I love that. I love that you're
Yeah.
right there. And again, rising tide raises all boats. So my suspicion is, as you do it, it will help the industry and engineers, which is to me a win all around.
Yeah, I think there's this little statement. There's no winner in life, right? It's not a zero sum game. We're not trying to
Correct.
snuff out our competitors or anything like that. We want the industry being successful is successful for us.
Right.
There is no 100% monopoly that you ever want to aspire to. This isn't. You should never aspire there, and therefore it should be working with your competitors, right? And that has happened more and more. It's certainly broader than the circuit board industry and cooperation, right?
Hmm.
Certainly our OEMs, particularly on the defense side, do it all the time, right? I mean, sort of back and forth ping pong
Yeah, they
with
do.
who supplies what
Hmm.
and what component and supply chain to build a
Hmm.
platform.
Right.
And so it is important to work with that. I certainly give a plug for David, and going into the PCBAA,
Yeah.
joining that even as a customer is important, because we are legislating. That also includes things like the PCBEA and IPC. And yes, now that I think you see two major things happening of a recognition by the United States that there's a problem, aside from the CHIPS Act, which I think has some more political things tied to it. One, the president signed off that we are Title III funding available. Okay, so that's a recognition that the PCB industry is a critical industry
Yeah.
for the United States, and one that needs some extra help to get going again from, again, sort of pre-dot-com collapse, which would be
Right.
about 3,000 circuit board shops. We're at about 200 now in the United States. So there's that recognition, and then you have the defense bills that are also recognizing it, and certainly specific on the defense side, but they're recognizing it through more available funding. You have things like the PCBEA PCEA that's working
Yeah.
on a concept
PCEA.
called
Yeah.
NUCO in order to bring really manufacturing that has been done overseas. For the first time, we're kind of like bringing
Oh, okay.
talent and resources back to the United States in order to yield smaller design patterns. So mainly
Got it.
MSAT processes that really don't meaningfully exist in the United States the way it's done for
Yeah.
your smartphone, if you will.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do that, and those are shared facilities among all the fabricators to get this into designs in the United States that are going to be fabricated, and then we all kind of learn together in order to take to take North America to the next level, and we need to do that
Yes.
together because you're not just gonna solve world hunger on your own, and you have to do it
No.
together.
Yeah.
And so there are a bunch of organizations. Summit is a leader in a lot of those, founding member in most of them,
I
and
know. I love that. Again, this is why I've kind of become a Summit fan and been tracking you guys so closely for so long, because somebody needs to take the lead. And I, I think you guys are maybe one of the most involved, or if not, one of the key leadership in all these associations. So again, I think it makes the whole industry better. So kudos to you guys. And them just hiring you, I think, is a vote in that direction to modernize and to think differently. So I think that's great. So, I mean, you and I are sort of talking in an insular way about an industry that we've both spent a lot of time in. But when we talk about solving some of these problems like supply chain, domestic manufacturing, getting additive, onshored, doing all these things, why the people that are listening to this podcast who are engineers care? Like, well, I know it will help them, and I have suspicions why. But in your mind, why do you think this will matter, or how it will impact them directly in their day to day?
sure, I think it kind of ties back to some of the stuff we started with in terms of getting to know your fabricator while doing design, inviting them into the design process, and where again Summit's positioning of customer centricity, new age technologies, or I'll say 2023. Let's just catch up with 2023 with Industry 4.0, different
Yeah.
ways of doing scheduling softwares, how we do process engineering, and really becoming a pure data-driven type company from an engineering perspective. On the engineer side, why it's really important to your audience is one, it's cool. Two is how it impacts your delivery of your own product lines, and for you to be successful in your own career. You have
Yes.
issues with if you say, well, I'm going to go overseas for this kind of stuff. You do have bad actors that are playing in overseas. I mean, who's to say that you can't put a small chip on the middle of a trace in a PCB before it's even assembled, and you already have something that could be a bad actor that is embedding these things inside where you do not have control of your supply chain. And so certainly the military cares about this, but certainly I think everybody else should care from a regardless of what industry you're coming from. At the end of the day, most of the things that are made inside the United States in the high mix, low volume world, they're either designed to kill somebody, or if they don't work, wind up killing somebody.
Yeah.
And so it is of the utmost importance to maintain that quality and also make sure that you have a secure supply chain by the fabrication inside the United States by trusted foundries like Summit has as a certification. The parts yields, all these kind of things that we discussed at the beginning there, that just makes your life easier. It allows you to then trust that your buying chain, once it goes to volume, is executing the program. And so those are important. Also, by the way, turn times are coming down too if you're working with it, and so you can be done the job faster, yield it faster,
Yep.
not just in volume. And so I think those are the things that would help an engineer out. Aside from, again, all those things come back to understanding your
Right.
fabricator and partnering with a company that wants to be customer centric to be successful together.
Yeah. And it's just, it's so much morphed into, well, I just get my boards. Once it goes into production or pre-production, it goes to their contract manufacturer and they're like, what board? They handle all that, which they do, but then the knowledge base doesn't get back to you. that says, like you said, it's a knowledge that can go across all the products you build, save you money on every design, make you a better engineer. And what I really like, what I'm thinking about is, well, the one thing is, if you really do what you say you're going to do at Summit, Sean, people will get their boards on time and they'll be right and their yields will be better and their costs are lower. To me, there's no downside.
No, no. And, you know, there's nothing better, especially in the quick turn area, than a customer sending us a design on a Friday night for some new engineer that needs to get this thing made. And the awesome kind of, you know, just see it in their face when we spin it up on the weekend and hand deliver it to their desk on a Monday morning. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, we make them look very good, and it's such a cool feeling because you're taking these tangible, you know, intangible designs that are just on a computer and making them into a real thing. And so that's a really cool feeling that we get for delivering our commitment there. And I also think that it's that cool feeling that certainly those young engineers that, you know, are making a statement of like, I got this done.
Right.
You know, and being able to walk into their boss and say, there it is. You know, you signed me on this Friday. Here it is now. Those are really cool.
And it's not something we're super accustomed to, but especially after COVID, we all live in a Amazon world. I order it yesterday. I get it on my doorstep today. So we think we could just do that with circuit boards. And in some cases you can, you know, if you just have all the right pieces in place and
And design
yeah,
producible and everything like
and
that,
they're
right?
design producible and all of that. But
Yeah.
I do think it takes a little effort on the engineer's part to self-educate and to, you know, get the PCB, be aware of that part of your stakeholder in the process. So it doesn't come back to you, or you don't have to do 3 spins instead of 1. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to do it. And I love talking about it because, you know, I came from that world. Okay, well, I know you're busy. I got to let you go, but let's give folks some places to go, at least at Summit. So I know you said they can come tour your place. So if they're local or semi-local, if they're in the Western United States, it's a pretty easy visit. So where can they learn more about scheduling a visit? Let's start there.
Sure. So on our website, that I think you're going to provide those resources at the end of this video. You can go to our website and schedule a visit through those portals, or if you already are engaged in the sales process, you know, through just contact your buyers, you can get a tour in through our sales representatives, or through
Okay.
field application engineering as well. They can come out and see your site, be on your site, and they can also bring you back to us. We do have facilities in Toronto, Chicago. We have assembly in Denver, and then we have 2 facilities in Northern California and 3 in Southern California.
Okay,
And
good.
so we
That's a
have a
good
good
point.
kind of spread around, and we have, because of COVID, we do have the ability to do remote, kind of forced our hand to do these kind of remote tours as well, virtual tours. I think you get a better experience when you're on site.
I do too, 100%. Although I've been advocating for virtual tours for a long time, I think it's a great ad for those that can't fly or don't have the time or the bandwidth or whatever. It's a good option, but I think you'll learn way more if you go smell some plating chemicals or something, you know. Hopefully not too much because your
No.
ventilation is good, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so people can visit your website, your FAEs, the salespeople, they can find it on the website. I will put that link in. I think you provided that for me before. Where can they, do you have like a blog or some kind of knowledge? Well, they could follow you on social media because I
Yeah,
know Jerry writes a lot on
Gary does
LinkedIn.
put a
And
lot on there. I was having a
yeah, and
conversation with LinkedIn
yeah,
through LinkedIn last night.
yes.
So we do have a blog that we have started on the website that's starting to generally
Okay.
talk. There are other fabricators that have been making blogs for a long time, and I do actually encourage you learning that broadly too, because learning
Yeah.
things does help us all as an industry.
Yeah.
There are books available as well. I will tell you they're more difficult to understand because they're kind of just like ones that were written a long time ago, and we keep them up to
Yeah.
date. But they do tell you the 10,000 different ways that things are manufactured for like each specific process, and so it's not as doesn't add up in your head the way you
Yeah.
think it will. But if you want to get into the nitty gritty of what are the actual chemical reactions happening in the plating tanks, then that would be a place to go geek it out. particularly the PCB handbook.
That's the one.
Yep.
I'll put that link in too. So that's Happy and Clyde Cook.
I'm not sure of the authors.
Anyways, I know
did buy it. Was the first thing I ever bought
well.
when I got hired by TTM.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
it really confused me because it does tell you everything, but what it does get into the real specific engineering, process engineering of how things work.
Right.
So those are other resources that you can use as well.
Okay.
Also, getting involved in IPC, I'd say that would be a great resource.
Yeah,
Being on
especially
committees or
sitting
going
on
to those.
sitting on those committees, you will learn a ton. So don't think that you can't join because you don't know a lot. They're looking for warm bodies, and you will learn along the way, and you will evolve. And I agree with you. That will really impact your career. So. Okay, well, I'll add those links as well. Sean, thank you so much. Congratulations. Welcome back to the industry.
Thank
They
you.
say once you're in it, you
Happy to
can't
be
get
here.
away. I think,
I took a
yeah,
hiatus. It was a sabbatical.
yeah, me too. So thank you again. Congratulations. Welcome back. And thank you and everything, all the teams doing at Summit. I'm really impressed with what I see and appreciate all you're doing. I'll let you go. But I hope you'll come back and update us as you get further down the road.
Great. Thank you, Judy. I appreciate what you're doing for the industry as well, bringing all the engineers on the journey to be more informed about their supply chain.
That's my pleasure. Well, for our listeners, thanks so much for joining us today. Make sure you go check out the show notes, everything we've talked about. I'll put a link for you in the show notes. We hope this conversation has been helpful to you. And if you follow from me any time, you know I've been saying, go to your board house. So not only do I say it, Sean says it too. So if you have a chance to do it, go see Summit or go see one that's close to you. We appreciate you. We'll see you next week. Until then, remember to always stay connected to the ecosystem.